Matrix Live, this is Tib, and today I'm with Greg from the Ansible community, who is not only a super friendly person, but also a very knowledgeable person with a background in data science. We can talk about many interesting things with Greg, but the thing we are going to focus on today is how Greg organized or was the mastermind of the Ansible conference, community conference, and how he organized that on Matrix. Greg, did I get everything right? Anything to add to that?
Pretty close to. Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm not the only mastermind, I think is the main thing to say, right? I'm part of a team that help manage the Ansible community, and they are super important too. I couldn't do it without them. I particularly want to shout out to Cybet, Carol Chen, who's our events coordinator and does all of the sort of marketing swag, newsletter writing. She's the real mastermind behind the events. I just helped out with like the architecture and infrastructure of how we were going to do it this time compared to last time, which we'll probably talk about in a minute.
All right, and let's get on the topic. So, what have you done, Greg?
Okay. So let me set the scene here. Ansible is a decent sized community. You know, it's a popular tool, and so we have a regular contributor summit where we get people who are writing modules for Ansible or code chunks or whatever, documentation. Contribution isn't just code, right? And we get them together to discuss and to update them on what's coming from the core development team and to talk about what they've been working on, all the good things you would expect from a contributor summit. And we've been doing this. We used to do it in person, and then obviously pandemic happened, and we moved it online, and we've been doing it quarterly online since March 2020. And to date, that has been on BlueJeans. And then we use Eventbrite to manage the sign-up process. And I felt like there was an opportunity when we adopted Matrix back in the summer as part of like the core community infrastructure alongside IRC. I felt like there was an opportunity here to make the conferences we were running more open, more FOSS based, right? Because something like BlueJeans and Eventbrite, it works, and it's kind of the standard that we've gotten used to in the last year and a half, right? But there's barriers. Every time you ask people to sign up to something, you lose a few along the way. So you put out the word and you say, there's going to be a conference, sign up here on Eventbrite, and some people won't, right? And then once you've got your Eventbrite, we send out a mail just before the conference saying, here, you need to join this BlueJeans link. Some people won't, right? They won't. Most will because they've already done the sign up, but some won't. And then again, at the end of that process, you lose all of that stuff. I really disliked this idea that at the end of the meeting, and we would have like an 8-hour day of talks and discussions, all of that is just gone, right? There might be some logs in IRC of some of the more interesting points, but largely all of the discussion that happened either in person, as we're doing now, or in the sidebar of BlueJeans is just gone, right? And I really dislike that. So I thought, okay, let's do it on Matrix. So what we did was we said, okay, how are we going to do this? Now, it turns out that we had to not use a straight up kind of one-to-one meeting format for one of our conferences because it ended up being quite large, and we needed to use a presenter style format where the presenters have a different link and the viewers get a read-only view, right? And they can just ask questions in the chat. And actually people quite like that. So we thought, well, let's use that model, because that way, what I didn't want to do is use the in-room Jitsi that comes with Matrix, because I wasn't sure how many people were going to turn up, right? It's not like I have a private room where I know the attendance. There are literally hundreds of accounts in our main rooms, and I don't know how many of them are going to click on it, and it might just crash. I can't base a conference on that. So, because, I mean, if it was like 50 people, it'd be fine, but if it was 200, no. So we had to come up with something else. But Jitsi is nice, and we've had contributors saying, hey, can we use more FOSS tools on like things like BlueJeans or whatever? So I said, okay, let's get a Jitsi cluster. Let's use the fact that Jitsi can stream that direct to YouTube. We already put our recordings on YouTube anyway, so it's not like that's adding more non-FOSS stuff into the stack. And hey, we get a free CDN out of it as well. So that's going to be super robust. We are not going to crash YouTube. That's fine. So let's do that. Presenters can be on Jitsi. They'll stream to YouTube. We'll put the YouTube widget into the Matrix room. And then for anybody who's either not on Element or still on IRC or for whatever reason can't use that widget, they can obviously just watch the YouTube stream direct. And we actually had a lot of people who were, say, working around the house. They had, say, premium YouTube on their tablet, so they could run that in the background and then have Matrix open in the foreground, so they were picking up the chat. It was working really nicely as a mobile solution as well. And so that's the kind of core architecture. So everybody in the room and the presenters on Jitsi.
Right. And so to summarize a bit, you did not use the embedded GT that comes with Matrix on with with Element. You had a custom instance of GT that's streamed to YouTube, and then that's what you embedded in the room, in the Matrix room.
Correct. Yes, and
All
there's
right.
two reasons for that. So the first one I've already said is that we can't be sure what the attendance level would be, right? And that we know that there's scalability there. My understanding is that above about 50 people, it might get a bit sketchy, and I just don't know how many people are going to come. In the event, we had about 100 people who watched the streams. Now, whether they would have clicked the Jitsi widget. Second problem is that it doesn't work for other members of the community who are still on IRC. I mean, yes, you can technically get the Jitsi URL out of a widget and pass it to people, but it's clunky, right? And the third one is just to do with the actual recordings. You can't record or stream the embedded Jitsi client because it's disabled, right? So you can't use it for that. And we want those recordings. I was not too worried about the YouTube bit. We can always upload the recordings later, but if I can't even record it, then it's really a non-starter. So yeah, I couldn't use the embedded Jitsi. Had to go for a custom solution. And then there's further things that we might get onto in terms of what I would like to have that are also not there, which also go into that as well.
And so what you described sounds really close to what YouTube is already doing with the embedded chat next to YouTube. So is did you want to do something different just because YouTube is not open source, or is it anything else that led you to get the conference on Matrix?
That is a perfect leading question. So partly, so from everybody else's perspective, I think it's the latter. It's simply that it's not particularly FOSS, right? And so if you switch from using BlueJeans to YouTube, have you gained much? No, not really. You've still got the chat somewhere else. It's still less persistence. Okay, I can't remember if YouTube puts the chat alongside the video these days, and so you still have it, but it's still separate, right? So my goal was, how can we keep a record and keep it part of the history of the community, right? So if I think about community, because my background's in community management, you say I'm a background in data science. Actually, that's a new thing for me. I started doing data science about 4 years ago, but I go back in FOSS communities for more like a decade. So if I think about what I want from a community, what I care about is cohesion and culture and history, right? And so when I lose context from my community, I really dislike that. So what I wanted more than anything was to keep the discussions where the chat was already happening anyway. And so that, and there's a corollary to that as a side effect of that, which means that if I'm using the place where the chat is already happening, then I already have my audience. Right? I'm not asking them to join a new thing. There are hundreds of people in some of our rooms, right? The main Ansible help room, which is not where we would run a conference, but there's like 1,000 accounts in that room, right? So yeah, I want it to be there because the people are already there. You have to go where they are, not ask them to join a new thing.
Okay, and did the Ansible community already hang on Matrix? Is it officially using Matrix? For how long has it been?
We took a vote, I want to say it was in July, to adopt Matrix, and I had to compromise. I unsurprisingly sat here talking on Matrix Live. I'm obviously a big fan of Matrix, but you know, we were an old school community, so I couldn't get them to go for let's drop IRC. I know that was never going to happen. I wasn't ever going to try and suggest that, but I got a vote through that accepted it as an equal. And so we use them alongside, and so we have to consider IRC when we design things, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. But that's where we're at today. So that's been, where are we at now? 5 months, 4 months, 5 months, and it's working pretty well. I think I haven't had much in the way of complaints from people. The bridges are super nice. Like a lot of the new features in the bridge development make life very smooth. Yeah, mostly people seem pretty happy with it.
Okay, so you have a community made of Matrix folks relying on Matrix and folks relying on ISC. Do you know do you have a proportion of how many people were on Matrix, how many were on IRC during the event? And another question which could be interesting. Yes, do you know if this brought you new people, if that allowed you to get new members into your community?
So yes, is the short answer. I wrote a blog post on this if people want the full details. I'm sure we can put that in the show notes. Broadly speaking, in the conference, we had about 100 people in the room. So I set up a new room. We debated running it in our existing social room, but on balance, we decided that since we were going to have multiple breakouts for some of the hackathon things, we might as well have a new room anyway. So we did. We got about 100 people. We had 150 accounts in the room. I think from I used the APIs to get the chat history after the event. I think I counted 100 or so people that were actually talking. About 30% of those were on IRC. So that's a decent conversion to move people over to Matrix. That said, if you look at some of our other rooms, it's a strong, very different picture. Like the main help channel where you would go and ask technical questions is still strongly IRC. And you would get varying amounts in different places. We have one room, for example, where the majority of that part of the community actually are on Slack, and so we brought the Slack bridge in, which really helps. It's the first time, literally. So this is an aside and nothing to do with conferences, but the day that we set the Slack bridge up, literally within an hour, I had a Slack user get an answer from an IRC user, and I was just like, I'm done. That is perfect, right? That is exactly what we want. So yeah, I'm super happy with all that stuff. So yeah, it was about 30% for the conference. Did we get new people? Yes, absolutely. We had people come in and start. So the format, just so people are aware, was actually broken up. It was a Tuesday and a Friday. And the reason for this was because there's a bigger Ansible event more around the product called Ansible Fest in the middle, and our community event goes around the edges. And so we had a hackathon and participation day on the Tuesday, and then more a kind of traditional conference with presentations and things on the Friday. And what was really, really nice, and this is where I think I was a bit vindicated in my choice, we had people discussing things throughout the week. So instead of it being on a standard meeting platform and you disappear at the end of the day, the chat log is gone, now I've got people discussing things, continuing to participate through the week, and then we get to Friday and they get that boost, and then they were discussing things again into the following week. And we definitely had new people getting, patches merged and so on as a result of the hackathon, and that people that we'd not seen before. So that was a big result. I was very happy with that.
Very cool. So getting the conference on Matrix and Element allowed you to get some conversion for people who join maybe just as lurkers initially and then who sticked around.
Right, and what I thought was quite interesting was I did some work on things like reactions and replies and how many people were using some of the features from Matrix that you wouldn't have in IRC, right? And I found that while we had a smaller number of individual accounts compared to last year's event, which would have been IRC and Blue Jeans, it was a much higher level of interaction. There were more messages per person posted by a huge amount, like 3 times higher. And a lot of reactions, a lot of interaction between people, which I thought was a big thing. And that for me is one of the big wins about something like Matrix. I think it puts chat front and center and gives you good chat tools, which none of the other platforms do. Right, the chat is an afterthought. And actually, if you're going to relegate your audience to just be on chat, the only other place I can think of that does a good job of building communities around chat is Twitch.
Yeah.
and actually, when you start looking at how that works about the custom emoji packs and being able to hand out things from the streamer to the chat, that's stuff I would love to see because that will work the same way.
All right. And from a moderator perspective, was it easy to moderate, to gather the questions, to maybe mute or kick annoying people if there were any?
So we have a super nice community, so I didn't need to mute anybody. But
Awesome.
we have good moderation. We have Mjolnir set up, so if we need to ban people, that's fine. It's not difficult. And the Jitsi, of course, is private to the speakers, so that's super easy to manage. In terms of moderating the conference, I think that's one of my takeaways was that trying to manage Q&A was not easy. Our solution to this was very old school. We grabbed a shared document on HackMD and we had an in-chat moderator. So one person, frequently me, was allocated to not be in the Jitsi room, but to watch the YouTube stream to make sure everything's running smoothly. And then to watch and interact with chat and to promote chat. And then what we did was anytime someone asked a question, we used a specific reaction to inform the community that we'd seen it. And then copied that into the shared doc so that the moderator in the Jitsi call could then read through the question list without having to work their way through chat or to follow chat particularly closely. And that worked pretty well, but it meant we needed additional manpower, right? We needed additional support because you needed at least 2 moderators to run everything. And that's fine. We have the team for that. But it could be nicer. I've thought of ways to do that. Actually, I know we both use Newsbot, the Headbot, and I reckon Headbot could be used for that job as well. You could easily have it reporting Q&A into an admin room, right? So.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So it's a bit cumbersome to copy and paste the things from one room to another, and you found out about Hebot, the bot we are using for this week in Matrix, actually, and you want to repurpose it as a conference bot.
I don't think it needs repurposing. I think the only thing you would want is to disable its thanks for your news post, or to change its text. Either way, I think it's quite noisy to have that going on off all the time in a conference. But literally, if it was silent, you've already got reaction-based reporting, so moderators can mark a question if someone forgets to tag the bot. You give it a sensible display name like Q&A bot, and then people go, "Hey, Q&A bot, I have a question," and that's it, right? And then at the end of every talk, you run, bang clear, and you're done. So I think it actually works pretty well. I
So
don't think it would need a lot of changes. Yeah, it would work.
yeah, so if somebody wanted to run their own conference, you would recommend the setup you used, and you would use the maybe a forked or modified Hebot.
I think so. I think that would be one of the big wins. The other one is that getting Jitsi, we had some issues with Jitsi as well, but that's, I mean, you can use whatever you want on the presenting side, right? If you don't need streaming to YouTube, then you're not tied to Jitsi. I know KDE used Big Blue Button, for example, and there's a third-party project that can stream Big Blue Button to whatever RMTP endpoint you want to use, so PeerTube or whatever. So there's alternatives to Jitsi on the presenting side. But in terms of the format, having presenters versus viewers and splitting that out, I think it works really well. There's obviously ways you can make that even better. It would be amazing to be able to do that in room, and I could totally say if I could wave a magic wand and design anything I wanted, which obviously is free of constraints, it would be amazing to be able to promote people into the presenting side of the system using power levels, right? So you do it in room, and if someone's got an interesting question and you think it would be valid for them to jump on the stream and ask it in person, then you can do that via power levels or some invite system or whatever. That would be amazing, right? But I can imagine how that would be hard, and particularly hard from a UI perspective, because let's face it, this stuff's complicated enough. But I did say magic wand, so that would be something to be amazing. But even as it stands, it's not hard, right? Because if someone asks a good question, you give them the presenting URL in a private message and say, "Hey, come and ask that in person. Come join the panel," and that works fine. But otherwise, yeah, I was very happy with it. We can make the tooling better. We can make the integrations better. So I'm looking at a project called Wasabi, which I think can do things like bringing the Matrix chat on stream and things like that. But I haven't got it to work yet. I'm chatting with Flaky about that. No, it's good. It worked well. I was happy with it.
All right, super happy to hear you are happy with the setup you had. Do you have any last comment for people who would like to try to launch their own conference or organize their own conference using Matrix?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered most of the points. I think for me, the big win is the fact that you make chat central. And if you don't have an existing chat room, like a community that's formed around something, then it's not really necessary. Right? You can use if you're just running a seminar or something, then fine, whatever. But if you already have that space where you want to chat, then keeping the continuity of the discussion and the history of the discussion in one place works really well. And I will say, this is not the only community I'm doing this with. I'm running the same format for another meetup that I'm part of, much smaller meetup. But we're using the same format of Jitsi and then all the chat in a matrix room. And it's working well there as well. And it's helping to build that sense of community. It's nice that the speakers can join in and answer their own questions a bit later on, or the discussion continues. One thing that I do know has been done, for example, with FOSDEM, is to pre-record talks, and we didn't do that. And that's something we're going to investigate, is whether we want to pre-record talks. And that's partly for avoiding those audio issues with Jitsi and so on, but also it means the speaker can participate in real time, which is quite nice as well. However, it is a much higher burden on the speaker to get the recording done. So,
Yeah,
it's
some
a trade-off.
conferences seem to do pre-recordings, and they play the pre-recordings, and then you have a live Q&A. So it could be a
Yeah,
good
that's what
mix.
FOSDEM did, right? And
Yeah,
I think that's a good mix. But you still have to get your speaker to do the recording and find time
yeah,
with them to do
definitely.
the
Yeah.
recording. So that is a higher ask of your speakers. Whereas, let's face it, I'm definitely guilty of write the slides 10 minutes before the talk. So, there's a trade-off here. If you can get them to do it, I think it's a nice thing to do. As an organizer, it makes the conference more robust, and that gives you more security and a better feeling about what's going on. And we definitely had a couple of speakers lose audio during their talk, and that didn't feel good. So yeah, it's difficult. You got to play that trade-off. But overall, these are all small details, right? as a general sense, my whole team, my team, I'm not the manager of the team, but the team I work in, were very happy with the end result. And sure, we've got plenty of things to work on, but we're going to do it again. We're going to iterate rather than replace. Right, that's the takeaway.
Super cool. I'm super happy that this setup worked for you, and you seem really enthusiastic about how things happen. So I'm super happy about that. Greg, if you don't have any additional comments for viewers, I think I'm
Uh,
going to thank you.
I'm good. Thanks for having me. It's been really good fun.
Yeah, thank you, and see you around Matrix Live.
See you later.